Okay, it's a little after 10 and we'll get started. So thank you for calling in. Just a reminder to everyone that this will be recorded. This webinar will be recorded and placed onto our website. So you can go back to it and review it, share it with your colleagues, ask us questions later on if they come up later. But basically today, this is the California State Lands Commission's Marine Invasive Species Program. We're going to be talking about the Article 4.8 Biofouling Management Regulations, giving an update of the first year and basically just talking about some of the items that we've discovered through the implementation process that require a little bit more clarity. So we'll get into those, and there'll be time later at the end for questions if you have any. You always are welcome to send us questions at any time, especially if you view this after the fact. So let's get into it. So the biofouling management regulations here in California were approved by our commission last April in 2017, and they became effective on the 1st of October 2017. So they've been in effect for a little over a year now. They are applicable to all vessels that are 300 gross registered tons and above that are capable of carrying ballast water. So anything from a bulk vessel, a tank vessel, passenger vessel, auto carrier, unmanned barges, container ships. The 300 gross registered tons and above and the ability to carry ballast water are defined in our governing statute. And so this is the vessel population that the state legislature has granted us authority over. So I'll quickly spend just this one slide talking about the main components of the regulations. There's another webinar that we produced about a year ago that goes into more depth for each of these different components, and I'll link to that in a few slides. So if you have any questions or you're unsure about some of the requirements, I'd encourage you to go back to that webinar and review that. And then, of course, please feel free to ask us any questions. So the main components here are a requirement for a vessel to have a biofouling management plan and a biofouling record book. The biofouling management plan is supposed to be the vessel's management strategy for how they will manage biofouling. The record book is meant to document the implementation of that strategy. And these requirements were important for us because they provided a lot of international consistency. These are major components of the International Maritime Organization's biofouling guidelines that were released in 2011. And they are one of the ways to achieve compliance with New Zealand's craft risk management standard. There's another component that requires submission of an annual vessel reporting form. This form is to be submitted once per calendar year and at least 24 hours prior to a vessel's first visit to a California port of that calendar year. There are requirements for biofouling management for different wetted surfaces of the vessel, and so there's a requirement for management of the hull and a requirement for management of specific niche areas. And just for now, we'll say that the management requirements for the hull is that if a vessel is using an anti-fouling or a foul release coating, that coating should be aged within the effective lifespan of that coating. And if the vessel is not using an anti-fouling or foul release coating, or if the coating that they are using is aged beyond that effective lifespan, then the biofouling management plan has to document how biofouling will be managed on that vessel in the absence of a coating within its lifespan. The requirement for niche areas, there's 8 specific niche areas. So these are usually recesses or appendages that are typically hotspots for biofouling accumulation. And so we highlighted 8 of them in the regulations and require management of biofouling for these different areas. We don't say how they should be managed. We leave that up to the owner or the operator of the vessel, but the requirement is these areas need to be managed in some way, and whichever way the owner or operator chooses has to be documented in the biofouling management plan. We also have a provision for vessels that experience extended residency periods. So these are vessels that stay in the same location for 45 days or longer. And there's an extra requirement for them. And then we have sections to describe how to petition for an alternative form of management if one is warranted, and then a description of how to claim a safety exemption if the vessel is not intending to come into California but has to because of safety reasons. So again, I didn't really go into much detail there, but the other webinar that we produced last year has much more detail, and we'll link to that in a few slides. So implementation, as I said, the rule went into effect on October 1st, 2017. And at that point, only the submission of the annual vessel reporting form was required. The remainder of the regulations became effective on January 1st of 2018. And they didn't all kick in at the same time. So we phased in the implementation based on a vessel's dry docking schedule. So an individual vessel is not subject to these rules, to the remainder of these rules, until the completion of their first out-of-water maintenance or dry dock or delivery as a new vessel on or after January 1st of 2018. And we often get the question about why we're phasing it in this way. And it basically, the effective biofouling management is dependent on a strong biofouling management plan and preventive activities that are best implemented when the vessel goes into dry dock. I'm not sure why that happened. And so we thought it was necessary to tie the dry docking schedule into these regulations. So because this was a new set of regulations and regulating biofouling in general was new on the world scene, we knew that there would be a lot of outreach that needed to be done to make sure that everyone was aware of what the requirements were. And so we took a few different strategies of getting information out there. We developed a guidance document, and the link is right there on the slide here, and the PowerPoint will be posted to our website as well, so you can click on that and get the information. But that guidance document up in the top right corner had a summary of the requirements in the regulations, a section that had frequently asked questions and answers, and an example biofouling management plan to show the industry some of the things that we would be looking for when we conduct inspections. As I mentioned, we held another webinar about a year ago. So in September of 2017, the link is there, and it's also posted on our website. And in this webinar, we describe in more detail the main components of the regulation. And we also held several customer service meetings, one in Southern California and one in Northern California, where we again described the different management requirements within these regulations. And the target there were shipping agents in the Northern and Southern California areas, because the shipping agents are one of the primary conduits of information between us and the industry. We also prepared a few information sheets that our marine safety specialists take on board with them when they conduct inspections. And so the target here were vessel crews. And so every time a marine safety specialist from the State Lands Commission goes on board a vessel to conduct an inspection, they have these info sheets that they share with the crew, documenting the biofouling management requirements and the biofouling reporting and record keeping requirements. And again, those two information sheets are linked here on this website. So we've been implementing these regulations for about a year now, and we've identified a few areas where we think we can improve clarity. So through the inspection process, so as I mentioned, we've been phasing in the implementation. We've seen a decent number of vessels come into California that are subject to these requirements, and we've inspected several of them, or several dozens of them. And some of the things that we've noticed thus far are issues with the effective coating lifespan requirement and issues with descriptions of how vessels are managing their out-of-water support strips, which is one of those niche areas that we talked about earlier. And so we'll go in a little bit of detail into each of those, for each of those. So first, for the effective coating lifespan, The definition here comes from the regulation itself, and so we say effective coating lifespan means the expected age of an anti-fouling coating as determined by the manufacturer and based on the vessel-specific application scheme, e.g. coating thickness at the time of application, at which the coating is no longer expected to satisfactorily prevent or deter biofouling. So we've highlighted the middle section there because this is the most important part, that it's determined by the manufacturer and it's based on the vessel-specific application scheme and, for example, the coating thickness. So, and actually we'll go into more detail on that in a few slides. The requirement here is within the biofouling management plan, the description of the anti-fouling coating has to specify the applied dry film thickness and specify the manufacturer's expected effective coating lifespan, e.g. 60 months, at the applied dry film thickness. So we're asking them to document what the effective coating lifespan of the coating that they're using on that specific vessel. So the next few slides, we'll go through some examples of some of the useful documents that we've seen through our inspections, some examples of some incorrect documents that don't specify the information that we need to see. And a few examples of these are IMO AFS certificates. So these are certificates that are usually distributed by classification societies or flag states, identifying that the vessel is compliant with the IMO convention to prevent the use of harmful anti-fouling coating biocides like tributyl-10. Another example of incorrect documents are manufacturer product data sheets that you can get from the manufacturer's websites. We'll show a few examples of those later on. Oh, and a few other names for effective coating lifespan that we've seen are service life of the coating, the service scheme, paint scheme. There's a lot out there, but we'll give you some examples of what we're looking for. So this is a little rough to see. This is a scan, but this is a good example of a document on board the vessel from the manufacturer that tells us the expected effective coating lifespan of the vessel. We've blurred out some of the information that documents the name of the vessel or the products that are being used, but the key point is the part that's underlined in yellow there in the middle. The lifespan of the coating is 30 months, and it's vessel specific because they tell us what the vessel is, and this is coming from the manufacturer, so that's a good sign. This is another example that we've seen after we asked the question and we received this email from one of the companies. Basically, look to the yellow part on the bottom again, and the paint type and thickness is calculated to provide a 60-month service life, assuming an average speed of 18 knots, 70% time underway, and an average sea temperature of 26 degrees. So they took into account the vessel's operating profile. The paragraph above discusses the applied dry film thickness, where it says applied to 150 mils thick. So this is a vessel-specific application scheme that's designed for 60 months. And this is coming from the manufacturer. Here's another example that we've seen within a vessel's biofouling management plan. The red circle on the top is showing the paint scheme in months, 60 months for the different coatings. There's 2 different coatings that are listed there that we've blurred out. And they also indicate the dry film thickness for those coatings that goes along with the paint scheme of 60 months. Another document that we've seen within a biofouling management plan, again, this is vessel specific. Parts of the areas that we've grayed out document the name of the vessel, the manufacturer of the anti-fouling coating. The part that's circled on the top in the middle is the dry film thickness of the anti-fouling coating. And then the remark at the bottom states the anti-fouling thickness is shown for vessel trading at approximately 12 knots, sailing approximately 237 days per year for 60 months under normal trading conditions. So this is stating that it's a 60-month coating based on the vessel's operational profile and based on the application scheme. Another good example, this time again showing bits and pieces of the vessel's operational profile, the activity level, the average speed, and then the service time in months. And again, this is coming from the manufacturer. The table in the middle is listing the different products, the different dry film thickness, wet and dry film thickness for each of those products that goes along with that service life. I think this might be the last example, a good example. This again is coming from a manufacturer, documenting the name of the ship, the type of painting, the name of the product, and the service life of the product at 60 months for anti-fouling performance. One more. Again, just another example, different areas of the vessel that the paints are being applied to. In the middle of the table there, you see DFT, that's dry film thickness. And then the bottom shows lifetime of TBT-free self-polishing anti-fouling shall be 5 years by paint manufacturer's recommendation. Again, all of these are good examples of documents that show what the manufacturer recommends as an effective coating lifespan. Another example, here circled the expected scheme life. So again, there are different names for this and coming from different manufacturers or in different management plans, but essentially they're all doing the same thing. They're telling us here the dry film thickness is 150 microns times 2. The expected scheme life is 36 months. Now just a couple of examples of some of the incorrect documents. So this is an International Maritime Organization AFS certificate, and we've seen a lot of these. These are usually distributed by either the flag state or a vessel's classification society, and they essentially are certifying that the vessel's coatings are compliant with the IMO AFS convention. That's the Convention on the Control of Harmful Anti-Fouling Systems on Ships. And all this is doing is certifying that this coating does not have tributyl tin in it. It says nothing about the vessel or the coating's service life or the expected coating lifespan. It's just certifying that it's compliant with the IMO AFS convention. And so this is not an appropriate document to show us what the effective coating lifespan is. Here's another version of that AFS certificate. This one comes from one of the classification societies. The circle on the top is showing this recognition does not cover other properties such as anti-fouling performance or service life. Hold on one second. Or service life. So they're stating on this form that this is not an indicator of service life. Even though at the bottom of this they have an expiration date, this is an expiration date for this certification that the coating does not have tributyl tin in it. And it's coming from the classification society and not the manufacturer. So the other area where we've seen a lot of confusion is around the requirement that the vessel or the biofouling management plan document how certain niche areas will be managed. And the one that's been problematic is the requirement to manage out-of-water support strips. And so we'll give you a few definitions here and a few examples on the slides coming up. But in the regulation, out-of-water support strips means sections of a vessel's hull that rest on the out-of-water support blocks while the vessel is undergoing out-of-water maintenance in a dry dock or slipway. These areas are typically not cleaned or treated with fresh anti-fouling systems, resulting in reduced anti-fouling protection. So these are areas of the vessel's hull that rest on support blocks. The definition on the bottom is out-of-water support blocks, which means support blocks placed underneath the vessel while the vessel is undergoing out-of-water maintenance in a dry dock or slipway. And so when the vessel goes into dry dock, it sits on out-of-water support blocks, which are physical structures that are not a part of the vessel. The out-of-water support strips are the parts of the hull that are sitting on those blocks. So we'll show some examples here. So in this hypothetical vessel with these out-of-water support blocks underneath it, it's in a dry dock, the water has been drained, and the vessel is resting on these blocks. And if you see on the left side, these are also known as dock blocks or dry dock blocks and a few other names. So underneath those dry dock support blocks, out of water support blocks, are strips of the hull that when the hull is cleaned and painted, these strips are not cleaned and painted because they're sitting underneath those blocks. And so the rest of the vessel is cleaned. The rest of the vessel is painted and protected with anti-fouling coatings. These areas are not, and they become hot spots for biofouling accumulation. The two photos on the top are just more examples of out-of-water support blocks, and the areas of the hull that are resting on them are the out-of-water support strips. The diagram at the bottom is showing the underside of a vessel if it was opened up like a butterfly, so you're looking directly beneath it. The white rectangles represent the out-of-water support strips. So when the vessel's in dry dock, all of those areas would have been resting on out-of-water support blocks. All the orange portions of that diagram are areas that would have been cleaned and painted when the vessel is in dry dock. And then when the vessel goes back into service, those areas that are represented by the white rectangles have no anti-fouling protection at all. And so they become hotspots for biofouling accumulation. And so the requirement is to describe how those areas are being managed, not necessarily how the flat bottom of the hull is being managed, but specifically how the out-of-water support strips are being managed. And this diagram, or this picture, just shows us a good example of, again, some out-of-water support blocks, and then the vessel resting on top of it. And that big cluster of organisms that you see is contained within an out-of-water support strip from the vessel's previous dry docking. And so it's not, you can see it better with different angles, but the area with the cluster of organisms is a different color of the hull is a different color than the rest of the vessel, because that area during the previous dry docking was not treated with anti-fouling coating. And so during this dry docking, the vessel owner or operator moved the blocks around so that the areas that were previously out of water support strips can be managed during this dry docking. And so this is one way for these areas to be managed, is to move the location of the out of water support blocks the next time the vessel goes into the dry dock. So those are the two main areas where we've seen that could a little bit of confusion, and we believe could be improved with a little bit of clarity through this webinar. And I'll just close this section by just talking about some of the lessons learned over the last year. And basically, we're dealing with a different paradigm than with ballast water. So with ballast water, the crew is responsible for the ballast water management actions. And so with one of our marine safety specialists goes on board and conducts a ballast water inspection and finds a deficiency. For example, the ballast water exchange was conducted in the wrong location, or not conducted at all, or the ballast water treatment wasn't conducted properly. That's usually something that the crew is responsible for, because they're the ones that's carrying out that action. Whereas with biofouling, we're looking at preventive activities and biofouling management plans that are developed prior to a vessel going into dry dock. And so the crew is not involved at that time. And so the ownership and the management is responsible for developing these management plans. And oftentimes when our marine safety specialists go on board and conduct inspections, whatever deficiencies we find are usually not correctable on board the vessel. And so we've been advising the crews to elevate it to their ownership and management, because these are areas that need to be addressed at a higher level. And then just the last slide, just wanted, aside from ballast water, we wanted to provide a little bit more clarity on some ballast water exchange requirements. So in the photo on the right, you see Baja California and a bit of Mexico. The yellow represents the 200 nautical mile line from any land. And along this stretch of Mexico, there are islands. You see them located there with the blue circles. And those islands are considered part of land, part of Mexico. And so 200 nautical miles from those extends out to the edge of that yellow line. There's a bigger portion of where we're looking at. So just be advised that if you're traveling through this area and the requirement is to conduct the ballast water exchange at 200 nautical miles or greater from any land, that it's not just the mainland of Mexico or the mainland of anywhere. It also includes islands like this. So this is one area of outreach that we're adding to our marine safety specialist inspections. And so when they go on board vessels, they're showing this new map to make sure that all of the vessels that are coming into California are aware of the fact that islands count as land in the regulations. And that's it. So I'd like to thank you for participating, and I'll check if there are any questions. And it doesn't seem like there are. If there are any questions, please type them in now. And if not, you have my email and phone number there. And please feel free to reach out to any of us at the Marine Invasive Species Program if you have any questions, concerns. Again, this will be posted to the website. If you're watching this after the fact, please feel free to ask questions, review the previous webinar, review any of the other outreach materials that we've provided over the past year and a half. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for your attention, and we hope to be as helpful as we can. So I think that will end it.